Okay, so Eileen and I have been together for like 7 minutes catching up, but here we are again formally. Hi, Eileen.
Hi, Matthew.
We're both talking about respiratory stuff. Are you getting better?
I think so, slowly. I'm a little disappointed because I won't be here for Maundy Thursday or Good Friday or the Easter Vigil, but that way I will be sure that I am ready for Easter Day.
Oh, which one are you coming into?
The you do at 9 o'clock. Yeah,
Okay. Oh, great, great.
yeah.
Well, I'm struggling a bit with allergies, and then I'm wrestling with like allergy meds and I and fatigue a little
Mhm.
bit because the doctor said that one of my allergy inhalers can like make you a little bit tired, and it wasn't at first, and now it seems to be. I don't know what that is. Oh, Troy's
Mhm.
coming in. Let's see and say hi. Hey, Troy. Can you hear my chickens, Eileen?
No, I wish I could.
Oh my goodness, they're right there.
Wow, that's great.
And here's Miss River, who's guarding me.
Oh, very good. I can see. Yes, there he is. Hello.
Maybe.
She turned around at her name.
Hey, Troy.
I'm coming online.
Okay. I currently think I am looking at the outlet in your kitchen, maybe.
Yeah, that's a good guess. That's the other camera.
Okay.
Change my video setting real quick here, which is probably like face down on the desk. That's why it looks like that.
Troy, I have to check in on the thing with you.
Okay, good morning, guys. Sorry, I'm
Hi,
late.
Troy. Um,
I really enjoy this, so I appreciate it.
that's okay. We're starting an experiment. We have it for about 2 or 3 sessions so far. We've been recording gospel preview and then putting it out in a little podcast. Do you wish to interested in recording?
I don't mind that. I mean, I work from home on Wednesday, so uh this is definitely the casual me.
That's okay. I'm working from home today as well. Um,
Yeah, but you
uh,
didn't shave, so see, we're good. We're good.
I didn't shave. I'm gonna close my door because it's like really bright out. 1 second. River, be good.
Let me get this too. Lily comes home.
She came in, but honestly, she won't last. She gets bored. There you go. She's gone already. Um,
Okay.
whenever whenever I
I'm
come,
I'm sorry I'm so late. Now next week, I'll look better and I'll be on time.
it's okay. We're
Thank you.
trying to be like as normal, But how are you doing, Troy?
I'm in a pretty good spot.
Yeah,
Some minor, well, kind of minor-ish physical things, a little back pain and stuff, but I'm in a pretty good spot. Work
good.
is good.
Yeah,
Home is good. Yeah.
good to see you both.
Thank you.
So gospel preview today. There are so many readings between now and Sunday, but we're going to do the one that I'm going to preach on, if that's okay.
Sure, of
So
course.
it's going to be the Easter Sunday service. I'm going to share my screen. Let's find the right one. Okay, guys, can you see that okay?
Yep.
So I'm just going to share it because the bulletin's already ready for Sunday. I'm going to just scroll down, show you what's going on. Here is the Easter Day liturgy. The flower dedications are in, which is
Wow.
great. Then we start with liturgy. Going to get down to the gospel, and it's right here. So how about we read it in 3 sections? Let's share the voices around. I'll start, and then Eileen, if you pick up, and then Troy, if you finish out. Okay.
Sure.
Mhm.
When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so they might go and anoint Jesus. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They had been saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance of the tomb?" Okay, Eileen, take over.
When they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified.
Troy, bring us home.
He has been raised. He is not here. Look, there is the place where they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you. So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid.
I'm going to ask you to pause and think of a word or a phrase that jumps out and speaks to you, and share it now without describing why for a moment. Eileen?
Terror and amazement.
Troy?
Yeah, I'm going to say amazement.
I'm going to end with, for they were afraid.
Hmm.
So I'm going to read this to you again, okay? It's the Mark version of the Easter morning reading. And we hear about the risen Jesus, but we don't meet him in this text because he's gone. And I don't know if you know, but in scholarly terms, if you have a look in a good modern Bible, you'll see that there are two endings to the book of Mark. One that ends with "for they were afraid," and then this tiny paragraph afterwards, and then the other which ends with a much longer description of what happens next. And most modern scholars believe that longer ending is not accurate, or is later, is much later. Almost like somebody came along later and thought, Mark, you kind of ended on a bit of a cliffhanger. Let's like just finish off the story. And so they added a bit. But I quite like the fact that this section finishes with "for they were afraid." It's like, in some ways on Easter morning, we're all like, and we're joyful and everything's happy and it all got fixed and everything's great. But sometimes the implications of resurrection might be, oh my goodness, what now? So as I read it again, I'm going to ask you to track the feelings in the text, where they're coming from and where they're headed to. What are the feelings in the text? And we'll talk about that in a second. When Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so they might go and anoint Jesus. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They had been saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance of the tomb?" When they looked up, they saw the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe, sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He's not here. Look, there is the place they laid him. But go tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. I'm gonna pick up the text and drop it in the chat so that we can keep looking at it, but and it's Mark 16, 1-8. There we go. Then I'll stop sharing my screen so that we can see each other a bit better. What do you think? The feelings in the text.
Well, I kind of started with who will move the stone? That was the first place I saw where feelings were brought up. I can make up some, about going to the tomb and how they would have been, sad and things like that. But so I got concerned about, well, who's going to move the stone for us? How are we going to do this? That kind of concern. And then when they saw the stone moved, I would say curious and hesitant about like, okay, what's going on here? And then entering.
I'm going to pause you a second because you said you could assume some or you could make some up about them going to the tomb.
Hmm.
And let's do that for a second. What might they have been feeling going to the tomb?
Um, I think I would have been feeling sad, very sad, grief, um, wondering what would happen now politically and who would be on their
Yeah,
side,
yeah.
and um,
Some fear, some uncertainty,
uh-huh,
grief about the loss of a friend for sure.
grief.
But he's
Hmm.
not just a friend; he's also the leader of a movement. Uh,
Hmm.
and also, I would say some personal fear for themselves in that, oh, he got arrested, are we next?
Hmm.
Um, which in some ways makes me surprised that they're even going at all, because if they might be afraid of arrest, then why would they expose themselves by going to his tomb? But maybe they're thinking to themselves, and I don't mean this to come across wrong, Eileen, but I'm just talking about this cultural moment in history. The women didn't matter so much, so they didn't mind. So they went ahead and did it. But
That. Hmm.
none of the men are here. None of the disciples are here. They're kind of hiding. Um, I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree, and also women generally take care of the funeral rites, and I would want to honor my person that I loved by doing the funeral rites and
Mhm.
getting there and doing the wrapping and the anointing. So that would be powerful impetus for me to go.
Yeah, yeah. Troy, what do you think? I know you
It
have
is
some feelings to track, Eileen, but let's get to them in a second to see where we are now. Troy, what do you think?
it is interesting that only Jesus was executed by the Romans, but I think and nobody else in his movement, but I think you're right about the women. They just wouldn't have cared much. And Mary Magdalene is close to Jesus, especially close in the gospel stories we have. But it says Mary, the mother of James. Is that James, Jesus's brother? Is that Jesus's mother, Mary? I'm not sure.
Oh gosh, now
And Salome, I'm not sure, but those are people who are close to him,
yeah,
or at least one of them, maybe two of them.
I'm going to expose myself and my knowledge here. It is James writes a letter in the New Testament. He's
Mhm.
said to be the brother of Jesus. And some people make out, yes, the biological brother of Jesus. So therefore, Mary here could be the mother of James, who's also the brother of Jesus. That could be Mary, the mother of Jesus. Or it might be Mary, the mother of another James. And some people say that when James is described as his brother, it's not like his biological brother. It's more like, a brother in faith.
Right. Well, that's the issue of the Virgin Mary and how long was she virginal. And but to me,
Yeah,
as an academic person, right, or just reading it,
yeah,
if it says Mary, the mother of James, in Mark's narrative, there's really one James in the early church in Jerusalem who stands out. So maybe Jesus' own mom, and it would make sense if
yeah,
she went with Mary Magdalene
yeah,
to
yeah.
anoint her son. And I think they would be afraid and grieving
Hmm.
and feelings that are anybody would be feeling. It's a very, very sad time.
So I think there's both of those things. I think there's fear and sadness and grief at the loss of a friend. I do think also there's kind of confusion and uncertainty at the end of a movement. Um,
Mm.
and I'm kind of interested in it, and I'm playing with this idea partly because I'm thinking of what to say, but their movement has fallen apart and ended in failure. What do you do next? You know? Um, and I find it interesting, as Eileen said, the women here are doing the funeral rites. So they do the next compassionate thing that's available to them. They do the next loving thing that they can. The world's collapsed, their friend has gone, he's died. It was a terrible week last week. Um, let's do the right thing, which many of us when we're in grief do, because we don't know what else to do. So we do the next thing that we have to do when we're coping with grief. Sorry, I took that in a sideways kind of direction.
No, it's
Any,
okay. It's kind of a viewing, right? There may be some Jewish religious reasons they need to do this for his
Mhm.
experience in the afterlife. I don't know,
Mhm.
but it's a way to see him again, even though
Yes.
he's gone. Yeah.
Well, and then they're not sure if they're going to see him again because the tomb is closed and they don't know who's going to open it. So they have that uncertainty. And then it's open, um, and entered, saw a young man, and the next feeling is alarm. Um, I know you were keeping track of these, Eileen. So was that where you were going to go next? Yeah. What do you think about that?
I would be pretty hesitant about walking in there if the stone was gone. And I think I walked in, and the first thing I saw was the young man. I would have a feeling of needing to run, that there was something very bad that had happened.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess you don't know anything, and we know the story. We look back at it from our perspective, and so we know how it ends and all that stuff. They know none of that, so they see the stone rolled away. Has a grave robber come?
Hmm.
Is there something else happening here? They meet somebody inside the tomb that isn't Jesus, and like Jesus is gone. Like, is this person dangerous? I don't know.
It's a little weird. I know in the other, at least I don't have the other synoptic accounts in front of me, but there's two guys, maybe in Matthew, I don't remember, two guys dressed in white, I think, who might be
I
here.
I looked at this the other day and I can't
Mm,
remember. John has two guys,
mm.
I think, and I think John is like two angels, like just says it, I think. I should probably go check. We've got Matthew, who I think says two guys, and I think Luke says one guy, but I may have got all of that wrong. Um,
It's
uh,
not, I'm not answering your question, Matthew, really, but it's whether it's one guy, two guys, and John has that great bit about, and the head wrappings over there, right? And when Peter gets there later, that is just so gripping to me, that John's version of this. But when they come in there and they see the guy dressed in a white robe, you if he's not glowing, obviously, as a few weeks ago in the transfiguration account, right?
yeah.
You would wonder, who is this guy? Is he a prefect? Is he is he attached to Pilate's government? Is he working for Herod? What's he doing in here? Did he steal his body? I don't know. He
I'm grabbing
says,
up.
don't be alarmed. So at least in this version, they look scared when they see him, I guess.
I'm
Hmm.
grabbing a Bible, by the way.
Oh yeah, we can look it up online really fast too.
But we could look at it online really fast, but in some ways it'd be easier for me just to like flick in the Bible.
Sure.
I'm in my office at home, so in my office at home, I didn't know where the Bibles were.
We
There are
weren't
lots
judging you on that, Matthew. It's
there
all
are
good.
lots of comic books here, but less Bibles. But this is my grandma's Bible that happens
Oh,
in
how
my
sweet.
office. Um,
My
so
favorite description is when I think it's Mary turns to the man who's standing nearby, and she assumes that he's the gardener.
yeah.
Yeah, it's in
Oh
John.
yeah, that's in John. Okay. Matthew is really explicit. I think my grandma's Bible is the King James Version. In the end of the Sabbath, as it began to dawn towards the first day of the week, came Mary Magdalene and the other Mary to see the sepulchre. And behold, there was an earthquake, for the angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled back the stone from the door and sat upon it. Matthew is very explicit. Matthew is not messing about. I got mixed up. It wasn't John, it's Matthew. Matthew says it's an angel. There was an earthquake. He rolled the stone. We know it was him that rolled the stone, and he was sitting on the stone when they got there, kind of happy as Larry. So that's Matthew. We just read the Mark. I'm going to flip to Luke. Um, where are we? I'm still in the narrative of Luke. Oh, gone too far. Um, Now, Luke chapter 24, Luke chapter 24. Now, upon the first day of the week, very early in the morning, there came into the sepulchre, bringing the spices which they had prepared, and certain others with them. And they found the stone rolled away from the sepulchre, and they entered in and found not the body of the Lord Jesus. And it came to pass, as they were much perplexed thereabouts, behold, two men stood by them in shining garments. So the two men weren't in the tomb when they got there. The two men stood by them while they were perplexed, and they had shining garments. It did not specify that they were angels in Luke's gospel, but there were definitely two of them. And then in John, we have an interesting little dynamic in John. Let me flick back. I went to Acts. There are lots of resurrection appearances of John. The first day of the week cometh, and Mary Magdalene early, when it was yet dark, unto the sepulchre, and seeth the stone taken away from the sepulchre. Then she runneth and cometh to Simon Peter. So she sees the empty sepulchre and the empty tomb, and she leaves. She runs to find Simon Peter. Then Simon Peter goes, and he goes in and has a look and finds the empty tomb. And then they find the napkin, it says, in the King James Version, that was around his head, not lying with the linen cloths, but wrapped together in a place by itself. So then he went in also with the other disciple, and they came first to the sepulchre, and he saw and believed. For he did not yet know what the scripture said, that he must rise from the dead. Then the disciples went away. Okay, so Peter and the other disciple went away. Mary had gone and got them. Mary was just hanging out. But Mary stood without at the sepulchre weeping. And as she wept, she stooped down and looked into the sepulchre, and seeth two angels in white sitting, one at the head and the other at the feet, where the body of Jesus had lain. Some people argue that John has a number of different needs in his storytelling. He needs it to be Mary that got there first, because everybody knows that Mary got there first. But he needs Peter to find the empty tomb. So Mary goes and gets Peter, and Peter comes and finds the empty tomb, because Peter becomes a leader in the early church. The other disciple is probably John, but John doesn't mention himself. Then there was a story of an angel, and he had to fit an angel into his narrative. So Peter and John go away. Mary stays weeping. Then she looks in, and then the angels appear. And it does explicitly say there are two angels sitting, one at the head and the other at the feet. So, and then Mary is going to walk out of the tomb in a minute and bump into the gardener and find out that he's Jesus. Do you remember that bit?
Yeah, which I don't mean to keep talking, but
You can.
that second part there where the thing about the angels and John needs Peter to be there. I mean, Mary gets like a phrase in this version in the beginning. And Mary went and got Peter right away, right? In the first verse. But then here, where she sees him, she thinks he's the gardener. And then he says, don't cling to me. I've not yet ascended to the Father. Even some very skeptical critics, myself, I guess included, think something happened there. That does not feel made up to serve a need.
That story does not feel made
that
up.
Does not.
No.
Well, why would you think he was the gardener? Right? Isn't he glowing and on top of a 40-foot cross? I mean, that is a very poignant story. Mary had some kind of direct experience of Jesus on that first Easter day. I believe it. Yeah.
Well, I hear you. I also want to go back to the Mark reading that we're on today, because it's this Sunday's reading. I feel like there's some authenticity, partly because of all of these feelings and practical kind of moments. But then there's this problem in Mark's gospel, there's one angel. In Matthew's gospel, in Mark's gospel, there's one young man. In Matthew's gospel, there's two angels. In Luke's gospel, there's somebody shining with bright clothes. And in John's gospel, there's two angels. Does it cause a problem for you that the number of angels and exactly how they're described and where they appear and where they fit in the story, does that cause you a problem with this narrative? Eileen,
Eileen first, Eileen?
No, it doesn't cause me a problem with the narrative. As the dean of my cathedral has said, this is poetry.
Oh yeah. Is that? I'm sorry. Carry on, Eileen.
So that's it's I think exactly what Troy was saying was that something happened. There's reality in here. And whether, someone says, oh, it was a young man or it was an angel or what, there was a holy entity there,
Yeah.
I believe.
Yeah.
I
Um,
was I was a fundamentalist or evangelical Christian for years, maybe a decade, through college in my 20s, and then went away from the church for a long time, and then came back, right, as an Episcopalian person. But I used to struggle with that all the time. I mean,
yeah.
all the time. And the one thing I could say was, well, there's no collusion. I had such a very, really kind of elementary idea of how these things were composed, but as a young person. But no, you're gonna have variances in any kind of historical account like that with
Yeah.
multiple eyewitness persons who were there. So
Is that how you resolved it?
yeah, I do not think, and I heard this phrase from well, anyway, something like, the Bible did not fall out of the sky in a glad bag, right? Like zipped up, and there's human thumbprints all over the book. The
Yeah.
books, the library book. So I don't expect the Bible. I don't think God wrote the Bible myself. I think it's a book, set of books. And here, it's okay to me that there are variances in the historical version. That's completely fine.
Yeah. So I was raised fundamentalist Pentecostal,
That's right.
and I remember it being a thing that people raised sometimes to like critique people's views of biblical inerrancy, that like there were different numbers of angels at the tomb.
Hmm.
And well, first of all, I think biblical inerrancy is a concept invented in the late 19th, early 20th century, and was an attempt to kind of combat some of the scientific ideas that were growing and saying that faith could resist them. And I don't think faith needs to resist science at all. I think that they're just two different lenses on looking at the world. And then I feel totally fine about these discrepancies as my kind of biblical understanding has grown, because it's four different oral traditions.
Hmm.
Um, and there was an event that happened at the cathedral about a month ago where some people became disruptive in the church, and the ushers did a great job, and the staff did a great job in resolving the situation. But I wasn't there. I wasn't physically in the space. And I came back from being away and was told about it. And so chatted to people. And I was at first just getting radically different stories about what happened. And it had happened that week. So got everybody together in the same room, sat them down, and like started saying, so we're going to talk about how this feels, and we're going to talk about our next steps. But first of all, I want to know what actually happened. And one person would rush ahead to the end of the story, and one person would want to tell the bit that really impacted them, and one person had a particular sense of what they thought was going on with the people that were distressed. And we had to like keep on stopping and going back to the beginning and saying, no, what happened first, and then what happened next, and then what happened next. And just with a week's space between an event and the storytelling of it, there were potentially multiple different versions. And it's helpful to like figure out a definitive one. But theoretically, the gospel's being written, 30, 40, 50 years later after the events. There's going to be some discrepancies. And I also am very relaxed with the fact that I totally believe that John's account is a little more composed, and he has some authorial intent in the way that he is composing it. He's saying, I want Mary to get there first, but I need Peter to get there early. Peter isn't in the other accounts, and I really want Peter in this account. Was Peter in the account? I'm not sure if Peter was actually there in quite the way that John described it, but I'm also fine about that because John is trying to communicate something deeper. And it's like whenever the book gets converted into the movie, or historical events get turned into a movie, things get slightly changed for the telling of the story, and it's being told in the spirit of the events, not necessarily an exact portrayal of the events. Um, and sometimes as a comic book fan, that really annoys me. Like when Kamala Khan's superpowers get completely changed when they get moved from the comic book to the TV show. That's annoying. Sometimes when they change stuff, uh, you realize that they couldn't show on screen what they could write in the book. So it's okay. Now I've gone around the houses and I should stop and see what you all think about any of that.
Well, it is a reason I continue to attend the Episcopal Church, because, when I started showing up again, I went through part of EFM. I'd like to finish it. It was a great deal. This was back in the old days. And so we read the Bible. And that was tough at first. Like in Joshua, what? Not enough people were killed. God's mad because you didn't murder enough children. I'm paraphrasing that last bit, but I just see it as a human library now.
Yeah.
And that's very helpful for me. But it took me a long time.
Yeah.
Someone first told me about critics like Marcus Borg. I'm like, oh my God, how could this person be a Christian, right? Because he had kind of that kind of view of scripture, not a high view. But so it's very helpful to me that I'm in at least a parish, and I think a church where where we can talk about the book in that way. That helps a lot. And for
Yeah.
what it's worth, I think when Matthew has Jesus riding in, he's on a donkey and a colt, right? Because he's got to fulfill the Old Testament
Right.
prophecies. Sometimes Matthew bends a little. So anyway, not that, and that does not make me feel like these are not legitimate, they felt they were writing legitimate historical memory or legitimate theological, passages or interpretations or dramatizations of what had happened.
Yeah.
And I think, there's evidence that some of these things were dramatized in the early churches, like we do with the Passion thing,
Yeah.
which means, the demon needs a line, right? What's a demon going to say now, right? You got to give him a line. Anyway,
Yeah.
I'm
Oh
done.
no,
So
absolutely. And I also think that's why there are two different endings to the book of Mark, because somebody came along later and said, this ending kind of falls flat. They're afraid. They finish with being afraid. Like, where's the joy? Like, let's get to that. And so I think somebody said, I'll just write an extra ending to it and add it in.
and some think his first ending was lost, right? Nobody knows, though. It could end right where it did. Scholars argue about that. Yeah.
Eileen, what do you think?
I was in a class that my mom would go to at the Episcopal Church when she lived in Southern California, and they were studying Matthew, and the instructor was saying that I guess from the way Matthew writes, he was probably very well educated and probably, oh, I can't remember, Roman, and that he wrote Matthew as one would write a like a university class, that
Right.
these things had to happen and then the next thing happened, and there's a lot of explanation and a lot of detail so that it would carry a person, so the account would build from one thing to another. And I thought that was really interesting, and because then you go to John and it's lyrical and moving, and it's very different. So I found that a very interesting way of looking at how the authors or the school of theory that wrote what they had learned, that they could that they could include 4 different views of the gospel and
Yeah.
all put it into one.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I think John writes later with a theological insight and also a desire for poetry to be there. I think you're right. Matthew writes this kind of longer account. Mark is actually the shortest gospel physically. This is chapter 16 that we're looking at, and it's almost the end. Whereas I think Matthew and Mark got to Matthew and Luke got to like 25 chapters, so they're much longer. Interestingly, often the same stories appear, and more stories appear in Luke and Matthew that don't appear in Mark, but they're shorter. All of them are shorter. There are less stories in Mark, but they're often a bit longer. And I've said this before, but they sometimes contain more detail. Little bits of detail, like when the feeding of the 5,000 happened, Mark describes that the grass was green, where nobody else does. And like, why would you put that detail in? Well, it was something somebody remembered. And one of the arguments I love about Mark is that it may have been Mark following Peter on his missionary journeys and writing down the stories that he heard Peter tell. So this may be like a first person account from Peter of the events that happened. I'm not sure if that's entirely true, but I like it as an idea. But so this story has a kind of a ring of truth about it because of the feelings and the things that they're doing and what's happening. And we've been talking about the differences between the texts, but I'm also really fascinated by the impact of the events and how the events led to the creation of this new religion, this new faith, and the transformation of lives, and led to the inspiration to write things down. And so even though we can get stuck in kind of deconstructing the textual stuff, I'm still fascinated by the impact of the event of resurrection on these people's lives. And it is authentic to me in some way that this text leaves us with them being afraid, you know, because like you could turn around and say, well, the resurrection happened, so we were all really happy. But like resurrection hasn't happened before in our experience. We have no idea what's going on. Well, they had the Lazarus story, but like we're like blown away by this. Like we're terrified. We don't know what's going on. Like I'm like thinking, how would I be? I'd probably be scared as well. Um, how do you feel about that at the ending? They're afraid. And that's where the text cuts off in our reading on Sunday morning on Easter Day.
Well, it's a pretty creepy story, right? If you get to the tomb, I mean, it'd be like, let's go and, raise the coffin lid and bury something with a person, and they're not in there. And
Yeah.
there's some guy there saying, oh, by the way, so that's certainly not Jesus assuming the kingship of Israel, right?
No.
The way there might have been some expectation. I don't know what these women expected him to do, but to die and then disappear is probably maybe
Mhm.
not on the list. And it says they said nothing to anyone, which is
Yeah.
funny, right? And John, they run back and talk right away. So I'm so curious at Mark's source,
Yeah.
what he was drawing on. And I don't know if he ends here or not, but I can see that being a pretty frightening event, because if you run into Jesus, he's and he's around walking, he's an animated corpse, I guess, or
Yeah.
somebody's got him. I don't know. It would worry me.
Absolutely. And let me check in with Eileen before I go on to another thing. But Eileen, what do you think?
Um, I'm okay with it ending that they were alarmed. Because I can just see, I would just, look at this young man and I would be backing up to run out, you know. So I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
I see I can see the feeling of necessity for adding the rest of it, but the rest of the story comes after that for me.
Yeah. Um, I'm interested about the line that says, he has been raised, he is not here. Look, there is a place to lay him, but go tell his disciples, Peter is going ahead of you to Galilee. Jesus isn't in the text at all. Like he's not there, he's somewhere else, he's busy doing something else. The biggest piece of action here is happening off screen, if this is like a movie.
Mm-hmm.
It was funny because Reverend Alex was putting together the pageant, the passion play for last Sunday with the youth and kids, and they were going to tell the whole of the passion story. Um, and so we had I think Tommy Ford being Jesus, who just turned 18, and he must be like, I don't know what, 5'11", 6 foot. And then we had May Akiyama playing the Centurion, who's what, 5 or 6, and she's like 3 foot nothing or something. So like she had to arrest Jesus and like put her hand up, and Jesus had to reach his hand down to be arrested. And then as he was directing the play, I was watching Reverend Alex, and he was like allowing the violence to be read by the narrators, but some of it, like clothing Jesus with a purple robe, he put into the action, and some of it he left out, like the bit where he was beaten by the soldiers. And we kind of laughed about it afterwards. And he said, "Yeah, I didn't think having a bunch of 5-year-olds like beating Jesus with plastic swords was going to really go down that well in the Passion play." I said, well, oh, and also he didn't have Jesus crucified in front of everybody. He had Jesus go off into a side room and do his final lines from off screen, as it were. But we did have the hammer sounds of like the crucifixion, but not physically seeing Jesus being crucified. And I said, I think you're following a great directorial kind of trope. The whole kind of Alfred Hitchcock idea that the worst violence always happens off screen and you imagine it, you don't see it. Um, but then I'm fascinated by this in that it's not violence, but it's Jesus' resurrection that's happening off screen. And all you're seeing is the reaction to it by the women. And their reaction is some alarm, some confusion, some fear. Um, and I think they'll get to joy, but they're just not there yet. And I feel some authenticity and like they are like me in the text. They're like experiencing it real time live, like on my behalf. What would this be like to experience resurrection? And they feel all the feelings. And then all the feelings start to like change and shift and morph over the next couple of weeks and months into resolve and service, and they encounter Jesus and they become this transformational force. But I'm okay staying with them in their fear for a moment because I feel like the fear has to be felt in order for them to get past it and get to the next thing. I did another monologue. I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's your show.
I got to decide which of these monologues get into the sermon on Sunday.
Well, we love helping you with that, Matthew.
I know.
Love it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I get it. I hope this is constructive for you for building your sermon. And I was there when there was a disruption in the back, right? And I couldn't tell you anything. So,
Oh, you were? Okay.
yeah, it was the service I was sitting in. So I was up in the front,
Yeah.
everything seemed cool, but
And what I realized was that the people that all had to do things all did loving, kind, but firm things for the
Mhm.
safety of everybody. And I appreciated that. Took me a while to like figure out exactly what happened, but everybody did what they had been asked to do. Um, and it resolved well.
And it felt that way to those of us in the front.
Okay.
I think, speaking for the group, right? But I didn't turn around and look and does someone need help? Like you could sort of feel it being diffused. Anyhow, I'm getting way off topic.
No, that's okay. In some ways it is the topic. It's like
Mm.
how did we feel in the middle of a complex situation that was unfolding and who's telling which narrative? Um, yeah.
I was a little anxious, sure, and
Yeah.
aware, right? There's so much public violence in our culture right now.
Yeah.
There was no hint this is going to become violent. Any disruption is unnerving for me.
Well,
Uh,
the thing that amazed me, just going down this route for a second, but I'll have to stop and get back to the text in a minute, is it was one of our older volunteers, an older woman who's, slight and you wouldn't think could tackle somebody that was being aggressive. And she didn't. She just knew who it was because she volunteers at the respite center. And she just talked them down, de-escalated, used some wisdom, used some calm and sensitivity, and managed to help them walk away. We had to help them off the site eventually. But it was this kind of um, no brute force, just some gentle wisdom to diffuse the situation, which was lovely and beautiful.
I'm glad. I could see when last thing I'll say, and I'm so bad. Father Jim, I guess I'm so bad with names,
Uh-huh.
who was kind of in charge that day, right? He sort of came out to the front a little bit because I was sitting up close. So I had the M that day. And I want to be near the front, and I'm still afraid of going up there at the wrong time or something. It's pretty new at it. I remember thinking, man, I'm glad I'm an usher today. I'm not in the usher group, but he was watching and really attentive, and I felt better. Like, I felt like he was probably doing that for all of us. Like, it's like being on an airplane. Look at the aircraft, the crew. If they look terrified, then something's wrong. But he looked like he was watching and it was okay, and he was alert. And I thought, okay, that's good. So that helped me. Yeah.
Um, Listen, shall I read you this text one more time and ask the
Yeah,
last
please.
question? So the last question is, what is God asking you to do now in the light of this reading? Okay. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so they might go and anoint Jesus. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They had been saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb?" When they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled away. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Don't be alarmed. You're looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, there is the place they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. What's God asking you to do now in the light of this reading, Eileen?
I, I'm I don't have I don't have something, that's like jumping out and seizing me, but um the feeling that, sometimes when I think God is asking me to do something, sometimes it really scares me and sometimes it feels good. And so I think part of it is, for me, is when I experience something that I feel is divine, to sit quietly with it and explore it from many ways, and take time to learn something.
Thank you. Take time with it. Look at it from different perspectives. Feel all the feelings around it. Thank you. Troy?
For me, really, it's just to come to church on Easter, come to church on Sunday, and be in a community where this memory is being celebrated. I got married. I began just playing by because I looking for church to get married in 2000, and it was a cute building. And then I was, very involved, and then went through a divorce and really kind of quit attending math, even though I was here sometimes. It really wasn't going. Pandemic was tough too, and nobody was going there for a while. And then I got married again a year ago, December, and that experience was so, although I was exhausted that day, the experience was just good for me. So I've kind of spent a year like trying to get myself back in. And so I'm back in this year, right? I'm doing EMing. I really enjoy coming to this class. So for me, just showing up and sitting there in that group is going to be worth a lot. That's all.
Thank you. I sometimes jokingly say, what is God asking me to do in the life of this reading? And often what I think God is asking me to do is to write a sermon. But I also, I'm going to go back to something we said in the middle, which is playing on my mind. When the world is shattered and everything's come to an end, and perhaps you've lost everything that you were hoping for, and your direction is meaningless, what do you do? And I think the women here are my example. They got the spices and they were going to the tomb, even though they didn't know if they could get to the body, and they were going to do the next compassionate thing. And I think God's asking me to do the next compassionate thing, even if I don't know if it's possible. So, okay, thank you guys for participating. Let's say a prayer. God be with you.
Also with you.
Loving God, as we move towards the mystery of Easter and resurrection, the joy of that celebration of new life in this season of springtime, we pray that you might bring us to life in our own hearts. whatever is aching, whatever is dying, whatever is fragile, that you might show us that there is beauty in those things, and that there is life beyond whatever we're going through right now. And it is the life that comes to us in the person of your Son, Jesus, our Savior. So reassure us. Help us not to be afraid of the fear, but to feel it and to be ready for the joy when it comes. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you both.
Thank
Hey,
you.
thank you. I love this access to you, Matthew. It's so
Mhm.
great you offer.
Welcome. Thank you.
Mhm.
Yes.